Welcome to my video. I'm very excited for this because the other day I had my highest rated win ever on chess.com. That means that I just played someone and defeated someone, and they were the highest rated opponent I've ever defeated. At the time of the game, they were over 2,400 chess.com blitz, which is insanely high. I feel like a lot of titled players, are not even that high rated. So I was paired against them in the pool, and I was pretty excited for the opportunity, a little nervous that they would abort because that's oftentimes the case when there's a mismatch, but they didn't. We played the game, and if you didn't need a spoiler, well, I'm sorry about that, but I ended up winning the game. So yeah, we will be analyzing the game a little bit. Do keep in mind it is blitz, so there will be a lot of mistakes and things like that, and I'm very excited to show this to you, so I'll see you on the other side. Alright guys, let's take a look at this game. So the opening, in my opinion, was not all that important. My opponent played some sort of Queen's Gambit declined exchange variation. They played Bishop G5, and this is the first little opening anecdote that I'll talk about. Ideally, I want to play Bishop F5. The bishop on F5 would be on a very nice square on the long diagonal. However, note that when I play a move like Bishop F5, or just move this bishop in general, I am weakening the B7 square, or the B7 pawn, I should say, because my bishop was previously defending it. So my opponent would be able to play Queen B3, attacking the B pawn, and it would be very awkward to defend. So by playing this move C6, I'm able to next move develop my bishop and meet Queen B3 with Queen B6. So if my opponent just plays, something, I can play Bishop F5, and if they play Queen B3, I can play Queen B6, and it blocks their attack on the pawn, and these doubled pawns are fine. I have an open A file. This is actually well known to be fine just positionally for black. So, anywho, I played C6, and my opponent played Queen C2. Queen C2 prevents me from playing Bishop F5, so what do you think I'm going to do? Do you think I'm just going to move on? No. I insist on getting Bishop F5 in. You are not going to stop me. My opponent played E3, and I was able to play Bishop F5. Now, I will note, as another opening anecdote, E3 is actually the main line. However, I've seen E4 a lot at my level, which is a little bit more ambitious, I guess you could say. And the idea is that if I take, they're going to take F6, and then they'll take the pawn with the queen and check me. And I've had this position a number of times. There are two things you can do. You can block with the queen and just sort of trade into some endgame, or you can play a little bit more dynamically with a move like King F8. And the idea is simply just to go King G7 and Rook E8 and sort of get an initiative. However, most players at that level are not going to blunder a basic, pin like that, so I believe the main line is Bishop C4, King G7, so... And this isn't even really a threat, because they do have Knight E5, but they should address it. So castles is the main line after Rook E8, Queen F4, and, I mean, it's equal. I'd say white has a little bit of a space advantage. However, we have the bishop pair and a little bit, I guess, of an initiative, because we force their queen to move, but neither here nor there. It doesn't really matter, because that's not what happened in the game. So my opponent played E3, I played Bishop F5, attacking the queen, and they played Bishop D3. And so I traded bishops, and here Knight D7 is pretty important, because I don't want to allow my opponent to play Knight E5 for free, and if they do play Knight E5, now I can just take it and play like Knight D7. I'm attacking the pawn, I have pressure here. I mean, something like this, my opponent could go for something like this, but this could be a little bit overextensive. I might have F6 in this position, though I'm not exactly sure. Yeah, actually F6 is the top move, and you sort of see they could be a little bit vulnerable, my opponents. So anyway, that's my idea behind Knight B D7, and, if I were to, like, castle first, they'd play Knight E5, and this would just be a little bit... Whoops, I meant to play F4, but this could be a little bit more complicated, but anyway, my opponent played Queen C2, I castled, I played Knight E4, and this, as you can see, I labeled, is what I would say was my first mistake, because my idea with Knight E4 is that if they take the knight, I can just take with the D pawn, and note that this is not capturable because I would take their bishop, so they would probably trade, and then allow me to recapture, protecting my E pawn. And as what actually happened in the game, they actually missed their opportunity as well. And I'll show that to you in a minute. But if they were to trade on e7, which is what happened, I just take with the queen, and I'm just protecting the e4 square. So, I mean, in the game they took and I took, and I have a nice protected pawn on the 4th rank. However, there's a little subtle difference to this position than the normal positions I get in the Queen's Gambit Declined, which is that my pawn's on g6. Well, why does that matter? It matters because my opponent can play bishop h6. Bishop h6 attacks my rook. I have to do something about it to not lose, an insane amount of material. I guess an exchange is not insane, but, I don't want to lose a rook. And then they can win my pawn. And it might seem like there's some discovered attack here with the rook. Now, I will say I did not see any. I didn't see bishop h6 during the game, so this wasn't even in my thought process, but there's actually nothing good my bishop can do. If I try, bishop f8 to attack this guy, they can just go queen f4, and they're doing totally fine. And up a pawn, so that would not have been ideal. However, after knight e4, my opponent did not realize that, and they just took on e7, which seemed very natural. I played queen e7, then they traded, as I mentioned. My opponent played knight d2, and in this position, I played what I believe was another mistake. I played the move f5, and f5 just seemed very natural to me during the game. I'm protecting the pawn. I'm sort of establishing this pawn chain overall, so it seemed really good. So why is it a mistake? Well, just note, anytime you move the f-pawn, if you are uncastled or you're castled kingside, moving your f-pawn will open your king. So if you're uncastled, it'll open your king this way. If you're castled, it'll open the king this way. So if you haven't gotten the hint already, f5 is a mistake because it opens this diagonal. So my opponent can just play queen b3 check. And they're forking my king and my pawn. I played queen f7 and they just took the pawn. So my opponent is up a pawn, so it's not great for me. I played rook b8, my opponent took on c6, and this is where I made my first blunder, and my opponent also missed it. I played rook takes b2. And, okay, I was actually, I actually had the arrows up for when I was analyzing earlier, so it kind of spoils why it's a blunder, but yeah, note that my rook protects the a8 rook. It's responsible for the a8 rook, which is being eyed by the queen. So that's simply why rook takes b2 was a mistake, because they can just take the rook with check, and it, I mean, for all intents and purposes, probably ends the game. I probably wouldn't have resigned on the spot, but it would have been very difficult to come back from. However, my opponent missed it, and they played the move knight b3. And so I just gathered myself, I breathed a big sigh of relief, and I just thought, okay, I lost a rook, they missed it, I just played knight b6, just protecting my rook. My opponent played rook fb1, I played the move rook c8, and this is sort of the interesting transition of the game. So this was sort of a danger levels concept to where they're attacking my rook with their rook. However, I attack their queen, which is a piece of higher value. So if my opponent just moves their queen to b5 or something, I'm going to go in with my rooks. And this is still not great for me. I mean, white's still better, but you don't really need me to allow my rook on the second rank. I mean, it's just not an ideal situation altogether. So my opponent actually found, and chess.com actually gave them a brilliancy for finding this move. They can just play queen takes c8. And I didn't really put a brilliancy, but yeah, here we go. And I mean, the reason I'm skeptical about this is because, okay, so they took my rook. So that's their idea. They took my rook with check. I recaptured their queen, and then they took. So they won a queen for 2 rooks, which is a material advantage because a queen is worth 9 points, and 2 rooks are worth 10 points, 5 on 5. However, navigating these queen versus 2 rooks positions can be very tricky because, one side ultimately has a queen and the other doesn't. So you have to kind of weigh in, what are the pros and cons of going into this? And what I would say, I'd say probably the holy grail of all concepts as it pertains to queen versus 2 rooks is king safety. And if you have an exposed king, you don't, well, let's back up. If your opponent has an exposed king, it helps to have the queen. And as we'll actually see later in the game, that's kind of what cost my opponent the game, which is that they eventually exposed their king, and I was just able to infiltrate with my queen. So, so like in an ideal situations, like, my opponent just like coordinates their rooks perfectly. Maybe they even do something like this and then, just go after my king, things like that. Whereas my ideal is that they open their king, so I'm just able to like get in and just like check them all over the place. So we'll see which plan plays out first. I played knight b6, just looking for some squares. After knight c5, I played this move queen c4. It's a move I really liked because I'm just sort of invading my opponent and also preventing them from getting access to key squares. So my opponent played a4, I played king g7, a5, knight d5, and here my opponent played rook b7, and I played king h6. So looking back at the game, it's actually hard to determine where my opponent went wrong because ultimately my opponent wants to just coordinate their rooks and just punish my king. However, that's not possible because I would have a back rank open. So if they just got unlimited moves and like, I don't know, just play some random moves, if they just got this attack going, then I have a back rank checkmate on them. So that's sort of a problem. So in order for them to facilitate an aggressive plan like that, they have to play a move like g3. However, the problem with a move like g3 is now their king is a little bit weaker. And now that all their pawns are on dark squares, then I have the light squares that I could potentially invade on. So after g3, I did indeed play the move queen e2, just getting a little bit closer to their king. And after the move rook to b3, this is when I played a move that I'm pretty proud of. And now chess.com did not give me a brilliancy for it. I, however, gave myself a brilliancy for it. So feel free to pause the video. And what do you think I played in this position? All right, so if you need more time, feel free to pause the video. I played the move f4. And the reason I really like f4 is because the pawn can be taken by multiple pawns. It also hangs this pawn for what it's worth, but f4 is hard to find because of this. You just subconsciously think that, oh, the pawn would just get taken and like I don't really have a way to recapture. However, you do have to do some calculation. Now, if they play g takes f4, I didn't necessarily have the concrete set of moves I was going to play, but I knew I was going to play queen g4, king f1, something like this, and just chase their king. I mean, computer's saying white is just fine, like, in this position, but it's hard for me to buy. I still have, like, checks on them. I have a well-positioned knight to contribute to the attack, so, I wasn't really buying it for my opponent. However, that was sort of the move. Well, my opponent actually played the move I was hoping they would play, which is e takes f4. And you might think, well, Daniel, what's the deal? I mean, their king side is still sort of the same, and you just lost a pawn. Well, this is what's called a clearance sacrifice, to where I sacrificed my pawn, forced, well, maybe not forced, but compelled their e pawn to move, so I could play the move pawn to e3 myself. And maybe not brilliancy, but I'll give myself an exclamation point. And I saw this when I played f4. So the idea behind e3 is to simply invade with my pawn, and if they take, I just get my knight in. And like suddenly my opponent's in trouble. I mean, they can't really stop queen g2 mate. They have to sack, and then their king is just super exposed. I'm going to pick off this. I'm going to be attacking the knight and rook as well. I mean, it's just not a fun situation. Talk about having the queen for, well, it's not even 2 rooks anymore, but like it's just like kind of not fun for my opponent. So they played rook f1, just protecting the f2 square. I took, and for a brief moment, I played queen d1, and for just a brief moment, I thought I was forking the king and the rook. Luckily, I saw that the rook was protected, so after king g2, I ended up taking the pawn on d4. And so queen d1 actually turned out to be a good move, but not because of the rook, but because of the pawn. Sorry, just checking a message that I got real quick. You might have heard that notification, but anyway. So I won the pawn, and my opponent played knight d7, and I would say, we could analyze, but like I would say honestly, my opponent started to like sort of fall apart here, They did move slowly. I thought they moved slowly for a 2400 level player. However, I also do have the queen and knight versus like the two rooks and knight, and it's just very difficult to play as white. So, I just kind of kept harassing them. I played knight e3 and like, I mean, I didn't really have any concrete threats. They just sacrificed, which might have been a good practical decision because a knight can just be very annoying to play against in blitz. Especially a queen and knight combination can be very deadly in some positions. So I just took and then, just made some moves. I won a pawn and they checked me, but I just went king g7. And, I made some moves, some more moves. I started to push my a pawn. I did realize that, like, ultimately, I am probably slightly better here. However, I do need to sort of prove my advantage with something other than my queen. So I decided to just push my a pawn down. So I pushed my a pawn, I play queen c3. I thought I was just winning the game here outright. However, my opponent just plays knight f3 and they protect the rook as well. So I was annoyed, but I just went a4, rook d7, king f8, king g4. Once again, I thought I won the game with queen c8, but they play knight e5, protecting. How convenient. Now, this didn't occur to me during the game, but I'll give you a little exercise. What do you think of this move queen d7 with the idea to just sacrifice the queen then push the pawn? Does this work? And why or why not? And this is a good calculation exercise anyway, so just feel free to pause the video. Alright, so if you do a little bit of calculation, you'll probably realize that doesn't quite work. Because after queen d7, knight d7, if I play... Note that knight d7 comes with check. So I don't even have time to push. And then they just go knight c5 and knight b3. And they just stop my pawn. And so, now this didn't occur to me during the game, but you do want to be careful when making these simplifications that leads to a knight chasing a passed pawn. And I think also this move, it doesn't work. Really for the same reason. The knight just comes in. So... And as you can see, I'm up on time. I'm just trying to flag him. So I played a2, and then, rook h7, queen c3, and then I just, and then this position. Yeah, I could have made a queen here, but I just, I'm literally one move away, so I just played queen c8, and my opponent ran out of time in this position, and I got the win versus a 2400 level player. It was my all-time best win on chess.com, and yeah, I think it was a pretty decent game.